So just a quick reminder, it might be helpful to have a pen and paper close by. And if you have access to a set of poles, please do have them at your fingertips so that you can try along with me if you're so inclined. And I will mention I've got the help of Rodrigo here in the back end to be managing the chat and the Q&A. So if you're running into any technical issues, please feel free to pop that into the chat. And if any questions come up as we go through the session today, please pop them in the Q&A. And then when I get to the end of the presentation, I will open up the floor. We'll go through the any questions that are there, and you can enter also questions at the end, of course. So we will go through that way. Thank you again for participating in this poll. This is giving us a good idea of who we have here. So really a fairly even split, I would say, in terms of healthcare providers as well as people who are there using the polls. And we've got lots of participation from Canada. That makes me excited as a Canadian, and from the US as well. And so lots of people either have a pair or seem to be knowledgeable about them, but also some people who've not heard about or used the polls before. So wonderful. All right. I think we can probably end that there, Rodrigo. That's great. Thank you. Excellent. Okay. Lovely. Okay, so the activator pole, let's dive in, start talking about it, start talking about how we can use it, both as a healthcare provider and as an individual using the pole themselves. The things I'm hoping that you walk away with today from a learning perspective is that you really understand the importance, number one, of falls prevention, why we even should be thinking about that. In the US, it is Falls Prevention Month. And so that is the timing of this session, but also we should not just be thinking about it. Obviously, 1 month of the year needs to be top of mind all the time. So understand the importance of that, why it matters. Learning how poles can optimize both walking comfort and stability, as well as complementing our fitness in order to reduce our falls risk. And that you understand the basic anatomy of the activator pole itself and the technique to use when you're using the activator pole. And that you've got a couple of exercises that you can walk away with and incorporate the use of activator poles into those exercises. And then ultimately that you're feeling energized to get walking with your activators or implement them in your healthcare practice. In order to walk away with that information, here's what we're going to cover: why falls happen and what their impacts can be. We're going to discuss how gait aids can reduce the risk of falls, introducing the activator walking pole features and setup, and then the technique itself, and make a differentiation between the activator technique versus Nordic walking, because there is a difference there. And then we'll go through some exercises that you can use with the activators for strength, balance, and mobility gains. And then we'll talk about a few tips for incorporating activator pole prescription and training into a private healthcare practice setting for those of you who are practicing healthcare providers. Before we get into all of that content, just a quick little bit about me. Like I mentioned, I am a physiotherapist. I've been practicing since 2003, and I hold the highest credentials recognized in Canada in both orthopedic and sport physiotherapy, and opened Zoomers Physiotherapy and Health Solutions in 2018, again, with the goal of really bringing a sports medicine approach to adult healthcare to support healthy, active aging, so we can all do the things that we want to do for longer and more comfortably. And I really incorporated the use of activators into my healthcare practice in 2020. So I opened in 2018 with a strong background in sport, and had certainly treated lots of adults in that sort of 55 plus category previously. However, what I noticed in my practice as we started seeing more and more adults in that age range was that we were getting more and more questions about walking poles, and we really realized we need to be more knowledgeable about them and to be able to help our clients access them and understand how to use them appropriately for them. And so I learned about the activators and incorporated them into our practice in 2020, and there's really been no looking back since then. They've been a great addition to our practice here. So the problem with falls: 1 in 3 adults over the age of 65 will fall this year. And that is basically a worldwide statistic. So it's true in Canada, it's true in the US, and it is true around the globe. And 50% of those who fall will sustain injuries that threaten their mobility and independence. So we see things like hip fractures, traumatic brain injuries, even sometimes things like forearm fractures can become an issue for independence if we're reliant on our arms for mobility and independent living. And what we see as a result of those injuries is that 50% of people who fall have reduced quality of life following that fall, increasing the caregiver demand. So needing more help with getting through their activities of daily living. And also those falls can often precipitate an earlier admission to long-term care. And so obviously they present a real problem for older adults. And mortality from all causes, so not just from the fracture itself, but from all causes, is 3 times higher for those who have sustained a hip fracture due to a fall. So if it's not repaired, we see that mortality is about 70%. So within the first 12 months following a hip fracture, much better, only 20% if repaired surgically, but still often threatens, again, mobility and independence in that recovery phase and on an ongoing basis. So the problem with falls is that they create a real quality of life problem and a real caregiver issue, right? So obviously, if we can prevent them, that would be helpful. This is one of my favorite quotes. If you don't take time for your wellness, you will be forced to take time for your illness. And this, if you just let that settle in, so if you don't take time for your wellness, if we're not taking care of ourselves and preventing what we can and maximizing our systems when we're well, then we will be absolutely forced to do that for your illness or due to injury. And so this is where prevention is just such a big piece. And it's such a big piece when it comes to falls, because we know that so many of them can be prevented with the right strategies. And those strategies, of course, are going to be because they address the different risk factors for falls. So whenever we're looking at risk factors for any issue, we typically divide them into 2 different categories. So the first is non-modifiable, or things that we don't have the ability to change. And then the second is modifiable, or things that we can change. So in the non-modifiable end of things when it comes to falls, we know that age is a risk factor. So the older we get, the more likely we are to sustain a fall. We know that a history of falls is a really big risk factor. So if you've already had one fall, you're at higher risk for having another. And we know that chronic conditions affecting sensation and mobility, so things like diabetes with peripheral neuropathy and anything that really slows down our ability to have a good sensation of where our foot is on the ground, or that alters the way that we can move and interact with the world, we know that those things can certainly increase our risk for falls. And unfortunately, those things are often things we can't change very much. However, you'll notice that the list of modifiable is much bigger. And so there are lots of things that we can modify. Definitely medications are something that we need to look at from a fall risk perspective. Not something we're going to discuss in detail here today, but definitely something that is worth investigating for our clients or for ourselves if we're concerned about our own falls risk. Improper use of gait aids, so making sure that if we are using something to help us move around, that we're using it appropriately and in the right technique. Vision can also play into our risk factor or risk profile for having a fall. And then we get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today here. And so that is our strength. It can be a risk factor. Our balance is a risk factor. Our mobility, our ability to be agile and flexible and mobile is a risk factor. Our fear of falling or our confidence in ourselves is a modifiable risk factor for falling. And our walking quality, so how well we actually walk, can also be a risk factor, but it is something that we can positively influence. So the great news is that when we look at walking technique, we can, like I said, we can influence it. We can make it better. And the quality of our walk is really going to be determined by a number of factors, including our stepping pattern. So that's one of the pieces of that walking technique that we look at. Are people getting a good heel strike with a straight knee and pushing off the toe as they walk? Is the body position upright with the chest high, shoulders down, eyes looking forward, not looking down at the ground? Is there a good arm swing happening? And is there good speed? This picture to the side is my daughter Hazel a couple of years ago, feeling exuberant about her walking quality. She might not be exactly exhibiting what we're looking for all the time, but she's certainly confident and she's got a good arm swing going. So I'd give her full marks for that. The additional thing in walking quality, so those are the nuts and bolts of the pieces of walking quality that, as physios, we're certainly looking at as healthcare providers. And the other thing that we need to remember is that our ability to have those things, to have the good stepping pattern, to have the good body position, to have the arm swing, to have the speed, is highly reliant on our clients' comfort, on their level of strength, balance, and mobility. And if those things are reduced, then we see that there is a reduction in confidence. And when there's that reduction in confidence, then we also see a reduction in walking quality. Right? So you can see how all of these modifiable risk factors for falls, or a lot of them, really play off each other. And the great news is that our activator poles can address a number of these different issues. So an activator pole can improve walking quality, and it can do that during regular walks by doing things like reducing the pressure through painful joints. And we're going to talk more in detail about this in a moment, but so we can increase somebody's comfort by using these poles. They also can give improved stability. And so if we've got more stability when we're walking, we can typically use a better stepping pattern. And we know that that is important for walking quality. When we have less pain and we have better stability, that generally leads to people feeling more confident with how they're moving. And when we feel more confident and we're more comfortable and stable, we tend to move faster. And then we can see that increase in walking speed, which is another really key health indicator. And again, a key indicator around falls risk. We can also, so that's how we can use the activator pole during a walk and how it's helpful during the walk, but it can also be a useful tool to use during strength, balance, and mobility exercises that then can help support better walking quality. And that's because we can use those poles as 2 points of moderate stability during exercises. So it's not as much stability as holding a countertop, for instance, when we're doing perhaps a balance exercise, but it's more than holding nothing. And it can better replicate what our body position is going to be like and the support we would have when we're out for a walk. So there's a little bit more functional crossover from the exercise to the desired activity or outcome. They can also increase or decrease the difficulty of the workout, again, by increasing the stability or reducing the stability that we have during exercises. And they can also just add variety to workouts, right? Variety is the spice of life. It's nice to have different things to do and different ways to challenge ourselves. And so they can be a useful tool to add in for that purpose. And now you don't have to just take my word for it. There's research out there that supports this too and supports the use of these poles. There's this fall prevention pilot study done where they took a number of participants through a 9-week program with a weekly class that included a 15-minute warm-up, 30 minutes of activator pole walking, and 15 minutes of stretching. And the exercises that they did in the 30-minute activator session were modified from the Otago Falls Prevention Program, for anybody that's familiar with those, they're just basically a series of body weight exercises that challenge your balance and strength in ways that we know are helpful for improving our falls prevention. And what they saw after this 9-week program, they did before and after testing, that there were clinically significant improvements in some standardized testing that they did prior to the 9 weeks and then at the conclusion of the 9 weeks. And so those would be the timed up and go, which any healthcare providers on here would likely be familiar with. But if you're not familiar with it, basically it's a test where you're sitting in a chair and then we time the amount of time that it takes for you to stand up, walk a certain distance, turn around, come back and sit back down. And we know that that takes strength and agility and walking speed to be able to do that within a certain time frame. So when we see that someone's ability to do that faster happens, and we know that their overall agility, mobility, and balance is better, and that's a good indicator for falls risk. Stride length was also significantly improved, showing again better confidence and strength in walking. And we know again that's going to help with walking quality. That is a good indicator of improved falls risk. And then the single leg stork stand or the one leg stand, we know that being able to maintain that static one leg stand position is significant in terms of its ability to predict somebody's risk of falling. So there was this particular research that showed that was presented at the Canadian Occupational Therapy Conference in 2018 and to the International Council of Active Aging in 2020. There was some other research done as a poster presentation to the Canadian Physiotherapy Association in 2018, where they showed that there was a improvement again in the Berg balance score, which is another outcome measure that we can use that just tells us about how stable somebody is on their feet after a 12-week Nordic walking program with the Activator Poles. So they were looking at balance and gait pattern. And interestingly, during the 12 weeks that people participated in this program, there were no falls reported and the Berg score improved. And what they saw was that when people stopped participating in the program, then they lost those gains, right? Which doesn't mean the program doesn't work. It just means that you have to keep doing it, right? Which isn't surprising, right? You've got to maintain, you've got to keep practicing those skills in order to optimize how your body is functioning and reduce that risk of falls. But they certainly are showing up as a useful tool. There's one last study I want to touch on here that was a systematic review and a meta-analysis of 15 studies. So basically they looked at a number of different studies that looked at the benefit of Nordic walking. And when they grouped all these studies together, the adults were anywhere from 60 to 92 years old. And their key findings were that Nordic walking is a safe and accessible form of exercise for the elderly, and it shows improvements for people in cardiovascular outcomes, so heart and lung health, in muscle strength, in balance ability, and in quality of life. Now, this wasn't specific to the Activator technique. This was for Nordic walking in general, but there's good reason to believe that that would cross over to include both types of walking. Speaking of which, here we are at the tail of two techniques. So there is a difference between the Activator technique, which is what I'm going to talk primarily about today, and the Nordic walking technique. And I just want to show you this little table just to sort of wrap your mind around it for a moment. So in the Activator technique, we're really talking about a primary benefit of increasing stability and increasing comfort for people when they're walking. Whereas in the Nordic walking technique, we're really talking about increasing the fitness demand, but perhaps a little bit less about adding stability and joint offloading. Both techniques here are going to have crossover, but those are the primary benefits. When we do the Activator technique that I'll show you in a moment, we're going to have our elbows in a bent position. Whereas in the Nordic walking technique, we have the elbows straight, more in that sort of cross-country style way that you might traditionally think of when you think of Nordic walking. The arm swing, because the elbows are bent in the Activator technique, is going to be smaller. In the Nordic walking technique, that's going to be a bigger arm swing. The grips are quite different between the two. So when we use the Activator technique using Activator poles, we have that wide core grip with a ledge for downward pressure, as compared to in a Nordic walking pole, we more traditionally have a wrist strap that reduces the need for sustained gripping, but doesn't allow the same downward pressure through the ledge as the Activator pole does. And then finally, primarily, we would use, in the Activator technique, we would use a bell bottom on the bottom of the pole, which is going to be more like the kind of bottom that you see on the bottom of a cane. Whereas in the Nordic walking technique, we're going to use more of a boot that's a more slender shape, and it designed to sort of angle because we're planting the pole back behind us instead of in front of us. So those are the two different techniques. And again, today, what we're really going to spend our time talking about is the Activator technique, but happy to answer some questions about the Nordic walking technique when we get to the end for sure. So as far as the Activator walking pole features, I mentioned a few of them here, but I'm going to go through them with you now. So the Activator pole, again, the tip type on the bottom, we can use a number of different things. Most often, we're going to have the bell bottom that is shaped like this and has the round bottom, you can see there. And that allows a really nice contact point that's nice and stable. Now, we also, when you remove that quite easily, then we've got this carbide tip. So if we were on really soft ground, maybe on a beach or something like that, and we wanted to be able to dig in, or on soft grass, then you can remove that tip and you can use that carbide tip, and it gives you a little bit more friction with the ground. You can also switch and use this more sort of boot-shaped tip, which I don't have here at my fingertips, but you would use that again if you were using more of that Nordic walking technique as opposed to the activator technique. However, you certainly can use the activator pole with that boot tip if you want to be able to go back and forth between the two different strategies of walking. So those are the tip types that we have. When using the activator technique, most often we're going to use this bell type. The ferrule at the bottom here just helps to reduce the vibration coming up, so that can help make it more comfortable to use the pole and reduces any irritation in through the wrist and hand. I mentioned when we were talking before the core grip handle. So you can see in the picture there and here with me that it's quite a wide grip here. And so that makes it quite comfortable. And then you can also see how it's got this ledge. And so because it's got that ledge, we can hold our hand down like this. And when we're pressing down on the ground, we can push down through that ledge. And that allows us to get good pressure down through the pole, which relieves the pressure on our joints. And also, because we're used in the activators, we're not strapped in, it does reduce the risk if you were to have a fall, hopefully not because we're doing all this work, but if you were to have a fall, you're not attached to the pole. So the pole generally falls away from you, and we reduce the risk of having a thumb injury, which is maybe one of the injuries we see most often in Nordic walking. It doesn't happen frequently, but it is, if there's going to be something, that tends to be the thing that is an issue for people. So when we're talking about pole setup, again, we need to decide which tip we're going to use. There's a great picture here in the middle of what those little boots look like. So, but if we're going to use the activator technique, we're going to choose that bell bottom tip. And then the height measurement is basically you want to be able to have your arm at 90 degrees at your side here. So when you're first starting with the poles, you might even prefer it to be a little bit lower, right? So for me, if I was using my right hand pole here, so my arm's at 90 degrees, that's about right. I'm comfortable with activators, so that would be the right height for me. If I was just getting going with poles, sometimes it's helpful to be one notch lower, just so that the pole isn't quite as long and it's not as much pole to manage, so to speak. So those are really the two considerations for setup. They're quite straightforward to set up, which is one of the reasons that I love them. Also with this button lock system, so that instead of having a twist feature in order to adjust the height, you just adjust it like a cane with a button lock. And so I love them for that reason. All right, let's hop into our technique here. So now what I'm going to do is just momentarily, I'm going to stop my screen share and I'm going to just demonstrate for you. And if you have a set of poles there, I would recommend that you stand up and just practice along with me. I, of course, can't see you right now, but please do give it a try if you like and see if there's anything here that I'm doing that might be a little bit different than the way you're traditionally walking with them. So you're going to take your two poles. Again, ideally, you've got them set up so that they're at your elbows at 90 degrees or just slightly lower. You want to make sure these ones are, of course, for the left and right. So make sure you've got the one with the L in your left hand and the one with the R in your right hand. That does make a difference because you want the ledge to be out underneath your the outside of your hand, underneath your pinky side of your hand. I'm going to step back here and demonstrate. So when we're walking in the activator technique, remember we talked about the elbows are going to be bent at the sides like this, body nice and tall, and then as the foot steps forward, we're going to plant the pole vertically opposite that foot, and then we just switch with the other side and switch. So it allows for a really upright position, and it's very natural feeling because we don't have to get into a really big swing of the arm. And it just, again, allows us to take the pressure off the opposite side. So we're always planting. If my left foot is stepping forward, my right pole is planting at the same time, and then switching with the other. So it's as simple as that. And it's part of why I love the activator technique, because it typically is quite easy for people to get a handle on in terms of coordinating the movement. Now, that's not to say that it's easy to get a handle on and to understand. Sometimes it's a little harder to execute. It often takes, maybe 2 or 3 times practicing that technique to feel confident with it and comfortable with it. But it really is, feels pretty natural once you get going, sometimes more so than that more traditional Nordic walking technique. And I'll just show you that just while we're here. So if I was doing the more traditional Nordic walking technique, then I would have my arms down like this, and I'd be straight arm swinging and planting the pole back behind me. So you can see how that is quite different, this position, than being in this position, right? And again, it's not that one is better than the other, it's which technique is better for you right now based on what you need. When we're talking about falls prevention, if we've got an issue with stability or strength, likely the activator technique is going to be of more benefit, because remember, one of its primary benefits is providing increased stability and increased comfort. All right, let's hop back in here and carry on. So just as a quick review, we're gonna set up the poles correctly. Once we've got those set up, then you're gonna make sure you've got the hands on the correct ones, right and left, and then plant one pole opposite the foot as you step forward, keeping the pole vertical. That's the most important thing. And you should be able to feel, when you press down on that ledge, you should be able to feel the muscles in your upper body and in your abdomen increase. So this is one of the other great things, is that in addition to all the other benefits, when we use walking poles, we can increase muscle use by more than 40%. And if that's hard to sort of conceptualize, if you've got a pole right there, I want you to take the pole, stand upright, put one hand on your belly, and in the opposite, with the pole in the opposite hand, push the pole down into the ground. And you should be able to feel, again, the muscles in your upper arm and in your back activate on the side you're pushing down, but you should also feel an abdominal engagement. And that's an abdominal engagement that we don't typically get when we're walking, right? So if we take on average 1,000 steps in 10 minutes, so then we're going to get 1,000 abdominal contractions in 10 minutes. So that's a great little added bonus. It's not super heavy load, but it's just regular activation of that muscle, which can be really helpful for core strengthening and stability. So hopefully after all that, you're feeling ready to get started and to incorporate activators into your walking plan, and so or into your healthcare practice. And so there's a couple of steps to consider when you're thinking about getting ready. So first one, make sure you're determining which technique is going to benefit you most. Are you primarily looking for more muscle demand, so maybe more towards the Nordic walking style, or are you looking to increase your comfort and stability, where we'd be thinking more about the activators? I always suggest that people only start using their poles for a small portion of the walk at the beginning to let your upper body muscles adjust to the new demands. Again, it doesn't feel like a lot, but because our upper body isn't used to being used when we're walking, it is a lot of repetitive use of those muscles, which is totally healthy, but sometimes it does take our tissues a little bit of time to get used to it. So I'll usually suggest, if you normally go out for a 40-minute walk, maybe take those poles for 10 minutes and then drop them off at home and carry on for the rest of your walk, or even just carry them with you. But do allow your body some time to build the strength to be able to use them throughout the walk. And then consider using warm-up and cool-down exercises before and after your walking program. And consider adding, again, those strengthening and balance exercises 2 to 3 times a week to complement your walking program. So by warming up and cooling down before our walk, hopefully we're, from a falls risk perspective, we're getting our body ready for that activity and we're in prime condition when we head out for the walk. And then by adding some strengthening and balance exercises into our week separately, we should be maximizing how we show up to that walk so that we're able to again, manage anything unexpected that happens, whether it's while we're out for a walk or just as we're making our way through our everyday life. So now I'm going to go through a few of examples of each of those kinds of exercises. So the warm-up exercises, as well as some cool down and the strength, balance, and mobility work. Again, feel free here if you're at home and you'd like to try these out, as long as you feel safe to do so, by all means go for it. Or you can just have a look at the pictures here of this lovely model who was willing to model for all these photos. You may recognize her. Okay, so in the dynamic warm-up, we've got, of course, lots of things we can do. A dynamic warm-up, the idea is that we're stretching those muscles through movement. And so what we want to do with the poles is just incorporate them in as a steadying point, or perhaps as a little bit of an increase for the muscles activation. So this side-to-side lunge would be the first one that you see there, where I've got the poles planted in front of me, legs wide, and then you're able to just use those poles planted in front, almost like a little bit of a fulcrum as you move from one side to the other. That might well help people stay in a bit more of an upright position, maintain better posture, get more out of that dynamic stretch. Leg swings, again, rather than having to hold on to something like a park bench or the side of a building, if you've got hold of your poles, you've got that moderate stability. So you're still challenging that stabilizing system to do some work, but you're not doing it completely unsupported. So holding the poles side to side, and then that leg swing can be front to back. You could also do ankle circles, again, warming up your ability to be standing on one leg, a little bit of moderate stability with the poles, and then just rolling the ankle in each direction on each side. And then a little bit of active arm abduction with the pole. So especially because when we're using poles, we are going to incorporate the upper body into our movement. Important to make sure that those muscles are ready for action as well. Moving into some strengthening exercises that we might think about and how we might incorporate the activators. You can see here in the first one in the squat, how I can use that just as a front point reminder in terms of body position. So it gives me that little bit of stability in the squat that might allow somebody to get a little bit lower if that was safe and comfortable for them. And again, it can just help optimize body alignment and stability. Heel raise, same thing here, really nice, moderate stability point. And again, a reminder to help maintain the body in a nice upright position, but without having to rely on a wall. It also makes the exercises portable, right? Because then you've got your stabilizing point wherever you are. So you can do these exercises out in the park if you were so inclined, and you don't need to have something like a countertop or something to hold on to. And then standing sideways leg lifts. So as a physio, I'm a big fan of lateral hip strength, or the outside of your hip muscles. And so doing these small side leg lifts to the side, focusing on keeping good body position, but also getting good leg elevation, is a great way to build that glute strength, which again, we know is a really key muscle in terms of controlling how the lower body is moving, which is helpful for stability and falls prevention. Of course, there are many strengthening exercises that you could incorporate these into. These are three just good ones, particularly thinking about the lower body when we talk about falls prevention. From the balance end of things, again, what I love about them is I feel like I've said it several times, but I'm going to keep saying it. This moderate point of stability is so key because it's more realistic to how we move around in the world. And so being able to just practice a bit of weight shift for someone who's perhaps at quite high risk of a fall is a really good way to just have a little bit of stability and safety, but still being able to get that weight shift over. And then maybe moving into some higher levels of difficulty. So this tandem stance position where we've got one foot in front of the other, so that heel to toe position, just holding in that position. Also love in a static tandem stance to sometimes add a little bit of head turns. And so when you've got the poles there, it might be a little safer to do that, you know, for any healthcare providers on who are thinking about incorporating this into their practice. Sometimes when we get people adding in those higher levels of difficulty to those exercises, it can start to be a little more risky for people to be doing on their own. And so by adding those poles in, perhaps that's the thing that makes this exercise safe and accessible for someone. And then the single leg stance. So again, a really important one for static balance. And again, you've just got those 2 points of moderate stability. It's not as much stability as holding a counter, but it's not as free as not having any support at all. And then, of course, with balance, we have not just static balance, but also dynamic balance. A little harder to show dynamic balance in static pictures. but I'll describe as we go here. So the first one you can see is a forward stick it. These are one of my favorite exercises where you practice just stepping forward into a one leg stand, but you're coming at it with some momentum, and then you try to maintain that position and hold for a few seconds. So you can see here these two pictures that are touching one another. My start position, the foot's in front, toes are lifted, heel is down, and then I step forward onto that side and lift the back leg and hold for 3 seconds. For a lot of people, this is a really difficult exercise when they have no stability or no stability point, right? Stabilizing point. But if we add those walking poles, sometimes that's just enough to be able to do this effectively and with good control. We can also take our one leg stand, and instead of it just being the static stand that it was in our previous slide, we can do an alternating single leg stance, maybe with an arm lift, right? So then we're reducing how many points of stability we have. So instead of being at perhaps, well, we would be at 4 points of contact when our both feet are down, 3 points of contact if we have both poles down and 1 foot up, but then we can take it to 2 points of contact with 1 arm up and 1 foot up. And then when you add the dynamic alternating back and forth between sides, that can become a much more challenging dynamic balance exercise. And then the tandem walk. So here again, we can use that heel to toe position or tandem stance position, but using those balance poles as a stabilizing force on the side for anybody for whom tandem walk might not otherwise be a safe or wise exercise prescription. And then finally, so we started this exercise bit talking about the warm-up options, then we talked about strength, 2 different variations of balance, and now talking about cool down or mobility exercises. And these ones really are necessary, I think, because it's important that we maintain our mobility of our muscles and joints from a fall prevention perspective to be able to react appropriately, again, when something unexpected happens. So we can use these poles planted forward and out to the sides as you stretch, again, to help optimize the position that you can get and to ensure that you've got good stability when you stretch. I often see with my clients that they want to be able to do a stretch without holding something for balance. And I always stress that when we're stretching and trying to get mobility, what we really do want is the lengthening of the muscle. And so I want the muscles to be as relaxed as possible, which means I don't want you to be fighting your balance in this scenario. I want you to be just lengthening the muscle. So using the poles and having them accessible to people, again, when you finish your walk in the park, allows people to have something to hold on to stabilize their body while stretching, but not being reliant on, again, having a wall or a bench or whatever close by. Here are a few examples of ways that you could use those poles. The standing hip flexor stretch is the first one you see there on the left-hand side. So keeping the body nice and upright and just allowing those hips to push forward slightly. And then just a slight variation with the heel down would allow us to access the calf. And then that forward tilted or hip hinged position for the hamstring stretch. And then you can see there on the far right, just even lifting the poles up and out to the side can really help give you that wingspan, anterior chest or front chest lengthening position in order to be able to just open up through the chest, especially because, again, we're going to use those muscles to a certain extent as we're walking. We want to make sure that we just loosen them up once we get to the end of our walk or activity. So just as a quick recap, the poles can be used as stabilizing support during strength exercises to encourage better technique and to get better results from our strength training efforts. We can use them as a modifiable support to dial up or dial down the difficulty of our balance work and perhaps make some exercises accessible for people that would otherwise be too risky. And as a mobility tool, it can, again, help us to optimize joint and muscle mobility safely. And remember that when we maximize all 3 of these systems and therefore improve our walking quality, we are improving our falls risk management, which is ultimately often what our ultimate goal is. Hopefully by now you're thinking, fantastic, but I don't have the poles right here. How do I get them? What should I do to get them? And if you've already got them, awesome. I'm glad you do. So number one, I would say it's really important. As a physiotherapist, I'm biased, of course. As I look at this slide, I think it probably should be work with a healthcare provider who's knowledgeable about poles as opposed to just a physio. But really, you do want to work with a healthcare provider who can help you make sure that you're choosing the right pole for you and that it's fitted properly for you, and that you get some review and practice on technique. As wonderful as I think poles are, I have also treated some poling injuries in the past. And that was really just from people either doing too much too soon, like I talked about, not sort of progressing in, or just not knowing what the right technique for them was. It really is a safe and accessible way to increase your stability, increase your comfort, improve your walking quality. Just have to know how to do it optimally for you. And then ideally you want to find a retailer that perhaps where you can try the poles on site. But if not, there are lots of different options. So these next couple of slides can just give you an idea of how you might access it. So for any healthcare providers who are on here with us today, you can just send an email, leave this up just for a moment. Or maybe even Rodrigo, you could put it in the chat just so people have access to it there. So there is professional pricing if you want to be a retailer. So you can reach out in Canada to orders@urbanpoling.com or directly to Diana for anybody in the US and internationally. So those will be in the chat there in a moment, those two emails if you want to access those. And then from the individual basis, they certainly are available on Amazon. They're also available at the Urban Poling website. And again, there are a number of retailers around. We again have been selling them here at Zoomers since 2020, and absolutely love having them as a product to be able to help our clients walk more comfortably, more confidently, and more safely. So lots of great ways that you can access them for sure. A couple of takeaways before we go to your questions. First, activator poles, just remember, can play a major role in reducing the risk of falls. And if we can reduce the risk of falls, we know we can improve adults' quality of life, right? Falls are not inconsequential. Remember, we talked about 1 in 3 people over the age of 65 fall every year, and half of those people have significant injuries. So we just want to reduce that risk of falls as much as possible so that people can keep on living and doing the things that they love to do. And then using these poles can optimize the comfort in walking, our stability and fitness benefits. Just important to make sure that they're set up properly for you, for the individual, and that you're using the poling technique, again, that is best for you. In addition, one last thing before we go to the Q&A, if you're thinking, fantastic, I've got poles, I love it, I'm working on my strength, balance, and mobility, but I'd like to do more, then I wanted just to share with you a program that we do offer here out of Zoomers, but it's available online. So it's our Club Z Fitness program, and we like to say we make aging easier and more fun, right? So number one, we have fun in our fitness classes, and number two, if we're feeling stronger, more mobile, more flexible, more confident, we're going to do more of the things that we love in life, and so life becomes more fun. And in our opinion, that's what it's all about. So, so just a little bit of detail about that in case you're interested in understanding how you may be able to access it. It is a fitness program that has been designed specifically for adults age 55 and up. That's not to say if you're 54 that you can't join. For sure, there's no age restriction. We just find that the content typically is best suited to those age 55 and up. And it's all been developed and is always delivered by physical therapists. In our classes, we have an on-demand library, but we also offer interactive live classes where we use a Zoom integration so that we can see and hear you, and you can see and hear us. We always say we can be just as bossy with people in their living room as we can in the studio. So the vast majority of our members actually attend from home, even if they only live 5 minutes away. And all of our classes really target building those 3 pillars: strength, balance, and mobility. And we've got different tiers of difficulty. Some classes that go to the floor, some classes that are all in standing, some classes that include jump squats. So it all depends on what your level of fitness is. We really do have something there that can be helpful for most people. So just another way, another tool in fall prevention. We've got to be thinking about how can we optimize strength, balance, and mobility. Last little bit about us, if you want to stay connected with me specifically, you can find us online. We've got 2 websites. So zoomershealth.ca is our primary site for our health clinic, and our Club Z site, club-z.ca. We're quite active on Facebook and on YouTube, so you can find us there. And we do send out a monthly newsletter. So if you have an interest in just staying connected with us, and we usually share some useful video or blog article each month. It just goes out once a month. But if you're interested in being added to that mailing list, you can just pop me a quick email at laura@zoomershealth.ca, and I'll add you to the monthly mail out. Maybe, Rodrigo, can you pop that in the chat too, just so that people have got access to it that way? Thanks. Wonderful. So that brings me to the end of the formal part of what I have to share with you here today. Again, I want to thank Urban Polling for inviting me here to provide this session. I hope that you've taken some valuable, useful information away. And I'll stop the share now, and then we'll just make our way through the Q&A questions. Excellent. All right. So just coming up to, so what do you recommend for someone with our osteoarthritis in both shoulders? So if we're talking about, I'm assuming the question there is which kind of polling technique might be best. And I would suggest that the activator technique is going to be best if you've got osteoarthritis in the shoulders. And I'll show you why. I'm going to tip my screen down here a little bit. So remember, we talked about in our walking technique that in the activator technique, the elbow is bent and we've got quite a smaller arm swing, right? Versus in the Nordic walking technique, we've got a much bigger swing and a bigger plant behind. Typically, in shoulders with osteoarthritis, they might be a little less comfortable with that bigger swing. So I would suggest that probably the activator technique would be a more comfortable option. And then Lisa asked, as an instructor but not a healthcare provider, do you recommend having participants in the Activator walking program complete a PAR-Q? Yeah, so the PAR-Q is a readiness for exercise and safety for exercise participation. And so definitely, I think anytime you've got somebody getting started in a fitness program, it's a great idea to have them do some sort of intake around health history and make sure that exercise is safe and appropriate for them. Leanne has a question here. Any tips for starting a new program, getting people motivated and excited about or in for Nordic pole walking or activator poles? Yes. So a couple of things that we've done here. I've done some webinars just like this like I mentioned, we've got a monthly newsletter that goes out, I think, currently to about 1,000 people. So we've been building that over the last 5 years. And so every once in a while, we'll do a webinar on a topic. And so sometimes I have done a couple of times one about poles, and that certainly piques people's interest. I've contributed a column in our local newspaper here, and that has definitely brought us some interest. I think we also have a walking group that we'll do like for 4 to 6 weeks in the spring and in the fall to just get people out walking with our healthcare providers here. And talking about different options for walking programs. And so that's a great place to introduce the idea of the poles. The other thing that we do as a retailer is that because our staff here are all knowledgeable about the poles, we offer for anybody who wants to come and buy a set of walking poles with us, they can call ahead of time and book a 15-minute session with one of our healthcare providers. And that's at no additional cost to them. And so they can come in, the healthcare provider will have a quick chat with them about what they're looking for out of a walking pole, quick health history, and then we get them set up with the pole that best suits them and give them a little lesson on how to use it appropriately. We always like to say as physios, we should be working ourselves out of a job. So we try to make sure that we don't sell somebody a set of poles and then see them later for an issue associated with those poles. So that's been a really effective thing for us because it helps people feel confident with what they're doing and using, right? And so we have loved that piece, and that's been really effective. So I would say webinars, blog posts, social media shares for sure, and then perhaps offer, if you have the capacity to give that kind of one-to-one lesson with people, that's a great option too. And thinking about actually incorporating a pole class into our Club Z fitness program. We don't have one currently, but we have enough people that are using them that I think that might fly at this point. So I think we might be doing that soon. Wendy asks, the hand grips on the activator poles look thick. Do these work for small, frail hands? So these actually tend to be best for, my hands are pretty small, and they tend to be, I would say, better than the smaller grip for frail hands because you don't need a tight grip, which tends to be, if you've got osteoarthritis or anything affecting the wrist and thumb, often that tighter grip becomes really difficult. So I find actually, usually if grip is a challenge, these handles are preferred over a more traditional Nordic walking pole. Again, different for each person, which is why it's important to try different things. But I find that these ones are quite good. There is also, I think I mentioned before, but on some of the Nordic walking poles, there are the wrist straps. But again, I find sometimes that's more challenging on a sore wrist, just dependent on the person. Do the activator pole technique change when walking up and down hills? Great question. Yes, slightly. So when we're going up a hill, we're not going to plant quite as far in front of us. When we're going down a hill, you might actually plant, step back this way, you might actually plant a little bit in front in a way to slow you down, right? So the timing in terms of going opposite arm and leg, that should basically be the same. Unless you were really steep, theoretically, you could plant both poles in front of you and take a couple little steps down. But generally speaking, you're just going to make those couple of little adjustments. But and most often people don't even have to think about it. It just sort of naturally happens because it's what feels most comfortable and most confident for people. So Beverly says, pain walking in the groin and thigh with hip osteoarthritis, stretching is difficult. Yep. So you're right, Beverly. Definitely. Let's start with the pain with walking. So if you've not tried using activators, I have lots and lots and lots and lots of clients with hip osteoarthritis for whom activators have been a game changer in terms of the amount of time that they can walk confidently or more comfortably. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's not taking your osteoarthritis away, but oftentimes it can give you a longer tolerance for an activity that you want to do with less discomfort. And stretching can be difficult because stretching is not necessarily in hip osteoarthritis, the tightness that you're feeling may be more associated with the joint capsule as opposed to the muscle, which is more of what we're typically talking about when we talk about stretching. And that's where working with a healthcare provider can be really important. You want to maximize your mobility as much as you can when it comes to any joint with osteoarthritis. But sometimes there are limitations or specific modifications you need to make for exercise. And doing that with the guidance of a healthcare provider is really your best bet. And then Loretta, what's the fee for the online exercise classes? Yeah, so our Club Z program is a monthly membership. And so there are 4 different tiers of membership that you can find on the club-z.ca. You can have just library access right up to being able to access as many live and library classes as you want in a week. So the cost really just depends on the level of access that you want. We do offer, though, if you're interested in it, a free consultation with me where we would just meet for a quick Zoom chat to talk about what you're looking for in classes and figure out if it's a good fit or not. And then we can always give you a chance to step into a class and just try one complimentary on us once we know which one would be the right one for you. So if you're interested in that, just hop onto the website and you'll see the link there to send us an email to ask for one of those free consults. All right. I think those are all the questions there. Is there anything I've missed there, Rodrigo, that you see?
We have 3 questions in our chat. One is from Matilde. She's asking if the setup is the same for Nordic walking technique and activator technique. If the setup
of the poles. So so the setup in terms of the height, yes, we would be similar. So you want to, the measurement is still the same. So I'll step back here again. So again, if we were using an activator, if we were using a Nordic pole, we would still take the pole to this position and have the elbow at 90. Maybe again, especially if we're new to using poles, dropping down by a couple of inches so that the pole isn't as long. And then, but then we're just going to have the poles back this way and be planting back behind us instead of in front, but the measurement for the height is the same. And remember, if you're doing the Nordic technique, then you're going to use those boot bottoms as opposed to the bell bottoms, so that you've got a better contact surface when the pole hits on the slant behind you.
And Loretta, yes, she's asking if the activator pole technique change when traveling up and down hills.
Yes, so I mentioned that in the Q&A there as I went through. So really, yes, the poles might be a little closer to you when you're going uphill, and when you're going downhill, you might actually plant them a little further in front of you to help reduce the acceleration down the hill. But as I mentioned before, it almost happens naturally. It's not that you really need to think about it, because your body will just sort of naturally have a comfortable place to place those poles.
And I'm not sure if you already answered that, but we also have a question from Irina. She's asking, what do you recommend for someone with painful shoulder arthritis?
Yeah, so that's back to, I think the activator technique is probably the best, because we're not in as much of an arm swing, right? It's going to depend on each individual, but typically I would say that the activator technique would be better tolerated than the Nordic walking technique when considering shoulder arthritis.
That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's what we have here in our chat as well.
Okay. Wonderful. Oh, I see one last question from Wendy here over in the Q&A. She got in just under the wire. Wendy, well done. So what does the tandem walking strengthen? So tandem walking, great question. And I'm glad you asked, because sometimes I think same as the one leg stand, people say, Laura, I'm not planning on standing on one leg. Why do I need to do this? Or I'm not planning on walking over Niagara Falls. Why do I need to do tandem stance or tandem walk? But both are really important for agility and balance and dynamic balance and safety when we're walking, which comes into falls prevention. So let's start with single leg walking, then we'll go to tandem. Single leg walking, or single leg standing, sorry, I'm giving it away. Every step we take when we walk is a single leg stand, right? So we need good competence and ability to maintain and control that single leg stand position in order to be able to be agile and move if we need to. If the dog runs in front of you while you're walking, if you're really in control of that one leg position when you're walking, you can quickly move to another foot. If you're not in really good control of that position, it becomes hard for you to have the agility to maneuver safely. Tandem stance is similar. So in a tandem stance position, our base of support is much smaller. So instead of standing like this with my feet underneath me, now I've got one foot straight in front of the other. And so I'm much more wobbly this way. And it takes a lot more core strength, hip strength, and proprioception in my ankles and knees to maintain this position safely. And we need that again when the dog does run in front of us and we need to step out of the way. We often step into a tandem stance position. So then we need to have control of that position to then be able to step out safely, or to be able to scoot behind a chair in a restaurant without falling into the person who's sitting in the chair, right? So we need to be able to move in that smaller base of support confidently and competently in order to be able to stay upright. All right. Wonderful. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our time together. I hope that you found this helpful today. And again, remember, you can always go to urbanpoling.com to find more information about the poles. And you can always go to zoomershealth.ca to check out what we're up to here at Zoomers in Halifax. Thank you so much.